I don't know how to do that one, Nico. Can you do it again? Yeah, there we go. We're starting this conversation with love.
Thumbs up.
Mr. Nicholas
thanks.
Seedsman, how are you today?
I'm doing all right, man. How you doing, Marco?
I'm good. 8 a.m. Saturday morning in Sydney, and you are in Brazil?
Yeah, Florianopolis, Brazil.
Very nice. Well, man, let's get straight into it. Guys, if you haven't heard of Nico before on my YouTube channel, you're in for a ride. We started off, I'm going to tell the story of how I met you because I think it sums up quite a lot. And then we're going to get into the questions that I've been meaning to ask for a long time. And then hopefully people can benefit from it. But Nico, I was living in Canada in a semi-basement apartment in Montreal. And it was like, I think it was middle of winter when you came to visit me. And I had been working with Nico online. We were helping out with his health. And we met through a buddy called Christian. And Nico messaged me one day. He said, "Hey, mate, I'm coming to Canada." I said, "Great. Do you want to stay at my place?" And we'd never met before in person. You're like, "Yeah, we'll stay at my place." You're like, "Yeah, I'll stay at your place." And you were arriving at like every time you fly into somewhere, you always arrive 2 a.m., 1 a.m., some stupid o'clock. Even Macedonia, you arrived at like some stupid o'clock.
Dude, it's my party trick.
Yeah. I said, "Yeah, no worries." And I cut a pair of keys and I left them. I left them in the mailbox. So I'm in Montreal, middle of winter. It's some random little semi-basement apartment. I put the keys in a mailbox, and I sent you a photo of the house and told you the address. And I'm like, "The keys are in the mailbox. Blah blah blah. I'll be asleep." And you responded with copy. And then I woke up in the morning at 8 a.m. and I walked to the living room, and the sofa was out, but you weren't in it. I don't know if you remember this. And I was like, "Where's this guy gone?" I'd never met you before. I was like, "Where's this guy gone?" And then I walked to the front of the apartment and you were outside in the snow in shorts doing Wim Hof breathing in winter in Montreal.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I just figured that was like the greatest hack to an ice bath. I'm like, this is cool. Just go outside in my underwear in the snow.
So that's Nico. So tell us about you. I mean, I guess let's start with your obviously you spent quite a long time in the SAS, and I think people are fascinated by that and they want to hear what it's all about. Me personally, I want to know what it takes, what type of mindset, what type of spiritual strength you have to develop to do something like that for a long time and what it involved. So how did that start for you? What made you want to join the Army or the Navy and then the SAS?
Yeah. So, look, man, as a kid, I just fucking loved war, right? Like if there's any belief that your soul just kind of keeps reliving lives, then that might be the most accurately aligned belief I could have, pretty solid evidence to believe so, that I can find, because I just had this passion for geopolitics and war and strategy and all this sort of stuff, right? Just fucking loved it. So as a kid, like we're in classes, like you taught me history that involved like some sort of civilization or war, and, not just basic geography to tell me that about croissants and shit. I really didn't give a fuck about croissants. Or, pasta dish or some shit in Italy. That's not what that I get excited about. If you gave me lessons on that, I would have photographic memory. And I think that's one of the differences between passion, right? Passion and is drawing from a battery or a skill set. You don't really need to draw from your natural energy source and consciousness. You're just fucking in it and there. So I had a huge interest when I was a kid. And it's like, in fourth grade, I remember, which I know what fourth grade is. What's that? 4 or 5 plus 5, like 10 years old. So I was like 10 years old. And I just remember like my affiliation connection with, just learning about Gallipoli, because that's the war that they would teach you in Australia, and understanding that. And while they were teaching whatever other nonsense, that was what I would be reading my notes back over. Like in my book, I actually interested in writing notes. I don't know how many 10-year-old kids are actually writing notes about shit too. So it was like, that's, it started from a young age. Then it developed into like me playing outside, all the playing of army men. And I think it was adventure. I think it was that call to adventure, right? More than anything. And just maybe some past lives there, or in some capacity where it involved war.
Okay. And so then I believe it was Navy first?
Yeah. So then I went through my schooling, 17. At the time, you had to be 17 to join the military. So at 17 and 10 days, I joined. Obviously going through all the recruitment process at like 16 and 6 months or something. Shout out to my grandfather who got me dressed in my blazer and tie and everything, like consistently, and prepared me for that. Like, Jesus Christ, I could have crushed an interview for anything with that man behind me, supporting me in that way. And yeah, I joined as electronics technician, electrical engineering, which was crazy because all the other guys were like, I hadn't finished high school, or at least hadn't done year 12. And everyone else had degrees or many years of experience, at least, and definitely finished year 12. It's a little bit out of my depth. And then that was the start of my journey.
Wow. Okay. And so then you do electrical engineering in the Navy at 17. And at what age did you decide to start trying for the SAS?
Well, straight up 17.
Straight up? Okay.
Well, straight up 17. I just did it kind of over. It's so crazy how much you can hide shit in plain sight. Like, if you don't announce shit, that really gets to people's egos, then it doesn't rock the boat, right? It's crazy. You could have a coup almost up to the point that you shoot a captain in the head, right, and overthrow him, or mutiny or whatever, right? Let's call it mutiny for a ship. You could have a mutiny to the point you shoot the captain in the head, as long as you just didn't talk about it, just kept going through with whatever, and you never said anything bad about the captain. I swear, captains or these people of authority would just ignore you as you go do whatever crazy shit up until the point that you conducted a mutiny. That's how much people's egos are in the game more than anything else. So I started at 17, and as soon as I finished recruit school, I just kept training, and then I learned what my body could and couldn't do and how to push it. And I think I finished in December. In January, I was training, swimming, running, and weights every fucking day.
Wow.
And I didn't stop at all. I just kept fucking going.
So you knew, like, that was your SAS was your end goal. You starting from the beginning, you joined the Navy, but you didn't plan to stay there. You knew SAS was the thing you wanted to do.
I knew what my goal was. I needed my mother's signature to enlist, and our family are a family of, like, educated priorities, for employment, right? For safety of employment. They kind of live in that money fear bubble, in a sense, of safety, and which is fair, has its place, right? I don't know what their lives were like going through different elements, growing up, my grandfather, great grandfather, mum, all that stuff. So it's not me to pass judgment on that, but that was their style. And the reason I mentioned that about the mutiny with the captain is because I trained, and no one else really picked up on me training for it other than my dear friend, one of which would train with me. They'd fall off, maybe another guy would jump on with me, and he'd fall off. To their credit, they both held on for probably a year of the dream each. So that was given credit to that. I just kept going for 5 years and ongoing. So that's why I say no one will actually notice if you're just training. But it's not until I started mentioning it, and I made it clear when I was finally got to ships like 3 years later, and I was running around the flight deck with army gear and boots and a pack, that people started really fucking hating on me overtly, because they're like, what is this not good enough for you? What is this not good enough for you? Oh yeah. And it was like, they weren't even hiding the way they would talk behind my back, like as I would walk past. So it was like, it was interesting, right? It was like passive aggressive cowardice confrontation, right? Of me, who was like a 19-year-old kid too, by the way.
So the culture in the Navy is like, this isn't, if you want to join the SAS, they don't encourage, the culture is, this isn't good enough for you.
There's a few things in the Navy they do that's fucking weird. One of them is leadership is dog shit, right? In the sense that I don't know how they select leadership. They've got an officer class, and I don't know where the fuck they get them from. And then they've got like, I don't know, they call it other ranks. No, not other ranks. They call it, I don't know, it's like a non-commissioned officer, class. And one thing that distinguishes them from the Army that almost is just like does not make sense from a leadership perspective is the senior ranks eat first. Now, if you've been in the military, you find that the lower ranks actually do the work. So senior ranks are doing way more of a whole bunch of fucking nothing because you're on a ship permanently. That's your home. So there's a whole much more. The more rank you got, the less work you're actually doing. So you could be working on a radar that is paramount for the operations of the ship and its safety, and it's not functioning, but you've got to eat and you're repairing it for like several days straight because there's some problem, right? And I use this for a literal example, and you'll still have rank pushing in front of you while you're in the line, making you wait an extra 30 minutes for food, and they also have no concept of thinking of the man behind them. So they'll just take all the food, and then you'll be standing there waiting for more food to be made so you can get fed. And the good news is you'll almost certainly definitely eat eventually. If you're not, hey, I've got to go back upstairs and repair this. In that case, I won't eat. Like going through my, and whereas in the Army, the leader will not touch their food or even line up for food until they've seen all their men eat.
Wow.
And that's a clear delineation, right, of leadership. So let that set the standard for some of the Navy shit that they normalize, which is very, now I've seen both sides. It's like obviously broken from a leadership perspective in many ways there.
Yeah. I mean, look, the closest I can compare it to is jiu-jitsu, right? And jiu-jitsu gyms and the camaraderie people have. And in most jiu-jitsu gyms that have a good culture, you treat the white belts really well because they make up the majority of the numbers. You don't have a gym without white belts, right? There's only a few black belts, there's only a few brown belts, but majority of the gym is white belts and blue belts, and you treat them well. So they help clean the mats and they help maintain the gym, but you don't treat them like shit. Some gyms do. There are some gyms out there that white belts are food, right? They don't matter. They're just a body to use. You hurt them, you injure them, whatever. And then those gyms never really build up good numbers. People don't go there. It's only for advanced competitors. And you have this kind of, it's just a strange culture. It doesn't help the sport.
Yeah.
So
I've seen a lot of them.
That's the best thing I can compare it to.
I would train around the world at different kickboxing gyms and whatever, and kickboxing is more my thing. And it like every time I go there, I look pretty athletic, right? But for those who know me, I'm pretty just reserved about that. I don't like really factor in. I've always been athletic since I was like 15 before training the Navy, so it's like it's normal to me. But to them, it's like, oh, he's got an ego, something to prove. And I'm like, I go in there and I'm like super reserved. I'm polite as hell. And I'm like, I'm even like, I'm humble to them at their skill set. And every fucking time, almost every single gym with their instructor, I've got to go through this first session of beat me up a bit and have some sort of dick measuring competition. And I'm like, I'm not competing here, buddy. I just want to do technique. I want to do this. And they will put me through my paces. They're like, to show how unfit I am or to show how unskilled I am. I'm like, hey man, if I was fit and skilled at this, I wouldn't fucking be here. I'd be at home training. I wouldn't seek an instructor. So I think it's common across all. It's actually more like the rule rather than the, it's the rule.
The exception, yeah. It's a lot of ego in combat. A lot of ego in combat sports, and I find like I teach jiu-jitsu these days, and when guys come in, I had a conversation with a guy the other day. He came in, and I could tell that he was a bit unfit. He hadn't trained in a long time. He was wearing an old uniform, so I could tell that he'd done it before. And I wrestled with him for a round, and his breathing was heavy. And I could smell that he was a smoker, so he's having a difficult time keeping up. And instead of going really hard with him, I was just telling him, like, hey, man, just breathe. And I'd let him have a position. And then after the class, we were talking. Turns out this guy had spent time in jail. He's come from a really difficult background. He spent 4 years addicted to alcohol and drugs, and now he's trying to get his life back. And he just opened up to me, and I was like, man, people come to these gyms because they're trying to better themselves. And if every time they come, we beat them up and we make them feel like we're the man, right? Because maybe I'm the black belt on the mats, but fuck, you're a SAS guy on a battlefield. So who's really, you know what I mean? There's no use in a dick measuring contest, because if you judge a fish's ability to climb a tree, like you can't do that. Everyone's got different backgrounds and different skill sets. I find a lot of fight gyms, there's a lot of ego because men inherently have quite a lot of ego. So tell me, so you said 5 years, so 17 to 22 you were training, so you got into the SAS at 22 years old?
17 to 21.
Okay.
Now, the journey there was, it was crazy, right? So I was in the Navy and I was training on the ship, running around flight decks for 20 kilometers around flight decks. The way I could measure that was like 3 hours, and I just run the whole time with like 50 kilograms. I didn't really know how to put the pack together. They gave me the boots were the wrong size. So every time I ran, I would tear off the skin off my feet and my heels, like huge chunks off the back. And I just bleed all through my boots, and then methylated spirits them for the next week until they were kind of healed and the skin had leathered up again, and then tear it off again. And I kind of did the running where you're allowed to do it, like with just sort of like an emulation of a weapon, which I just used to shovel and then all the webbing and stuff and the equipment, and which is more of a sprint kind of run. And I do all these things. Every lunch I do like, outside I do like 3 sets of chin-ups and 3 sets of push-ups, and I just got it till I could do reps of 20 on each and reps of 50 on the push-ups. Until eventually I was like, all right, I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. I had no one to compare myself with right? And I was a kid, so I hadn't really been around long enough to see shit. No one else was, doing a great deal of athleticism on the ship, right? So I don't know, I just kept going until I could do like 30 chin-ups, 30-something chin-ups, and then and 120-something push-ups in a row. And I was like, all right, that's okay. And then the run, I was like, I just ran as fucking hard and fast as I could. So when I actually put myself in for this Special Forces entry test, and the road was to go, first I thought it was going clearance divers first, then commandos, and then SAS. And I was like, yeah, fuck it, let's go in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's do it all, if that's what it takes. Then I realized I didn't have to do the clearance diver stuff, and there were more roadblocks to that in the Navy to get there than was just to go straight to the commandos, even though I didn't know anything for the commandos. But I did their entry test. I actually got roadblocked from that, by the way. That the Navy were like, oh, we need this, electrical engineers, hard to come by, not easy to train, expensive. A lot of guys fail. So they kind of, just before we deployed one day, rather than me doing the selection test the week before, they were like, oh, actually, there's something wrong with your medical. I'm like, well, what? They're like, oh, we don't know, but we wouldn't be able to be there until Monday to review it, so you're going to miss your selection. Like, they deliberately sandbagged me. And I, ignorant at that time, I was like, oh, okay. And then they never told me, could never tell me. So then I did this deployment throughout Asia on the ship and kept training. And when I got to Singapore, I paid for my own flight back to do it, which is the last leg before returning to Sydney for the ship. They were like, yeah, it's no problem. After this several months deployment in Asia, you can do that. I got there and I turned off to the test, and I came like first or second in everything. The only reason I came second in the runs was actually, I think I overtook a guy and came first in the sprint. It was because I actually didn't know the course and what was required of the Army. And I just had to sit behind the guy at the front to ensure that I knew where the fuck the finish line was and the turnaround point. Because I started trying to turn around halfway through when I was at the front of the run. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm like, I don't actually know, man. Like, no idea. Like, you're using a whole bunch of language I don't fucking know. You're doing a whole bunch of weird shit I don't know. Like, a completely different world from the Navy. But some senior SAS guys and special operations dudes saw that and did their absolute loyal and best work to bring me across. One was like a captain, I think it was Bram Connolly from the commandos, and this warrant officer, someone from the SAS, and they got me across. They fought the Navy, did whatever the hell they had to, and got me across. And I started going through all the training and trying to catch up to do it all. And I got a hernia from overtraining at 19. Like, I'm proper overtraining, right? Like, definitely, for sure. Like, I have no idea what a day off is. 3 different sessions a day. And then I went to the Army sorry, I instead of at the end, I did the whole school of infantry, which in Australia is fucking arduous. Like it is no half cock. We have to compensate for skill because we don't have the numbers to fight wars. So our soldiers need to be really fucking competent and to be able to do pretty much everything. So I did that with a hernia the size of a golf ball. And it was apparent that you can't have a golf ball sticking out of your fucking groin because of the agony. And I would just walk along doing all these charges with packs and shit, jamming whatever organ it was back inside of me. So at the end of it, they were supposed to go straight into some training to prepare me for the commandos. And then I went for their selection immediately after that. But I'm like, all right, I finished the infantry stuff. I'm like, I've got a golf ball here. It's pretty fucking bad and it's agony and keep cutting off blood circulation down there. And I'm afraid I was going to lose my dick and a few things. And it was pure agony. So it was not right. And they took me off for surgery. Not only did I miss the training, the army training was supposed to prepare me for that commando selection and course, but I actually I missed all of that. And then I even turned up on the commando selection still with no recovery, like exhausted still, super tired. And I tried to get them to roll me onto the next one, but you know, they didn't want the admin pain. So be it. And I got on there and I did their 30-something day selection. I got right near the end and guys were like, why the fuck is this dude so tired? You know, like clearly exhausted. I had to stand up in every lesson because I stopped myself from falling asleep, which was a great lesson and a great major failure for me because they ended up bringing me in and going, you're just too inexperienced to be here like 2 days before the end. I'm like, fair. And then they sent me on my way to an infantry unit while I just kind of, you know, felt sorry for myself and miserable and all this shit for a couple of days. But then I just got straight back on the fucking horse and started training. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to go to this infantry unit. They gave me a choice or preference. And I went there and I knew this was a new one. And I'd get opportunity to rise through the ranks and either come back and do that selection again or skip it and go straight to the SAS one. Now I have the experience to do that because you're fucking biting off more than you can chew if you try to go straight for the SAS one. Anyway, I went to this unit, had some good times, got my body healed, filled my adrenal issues, filled my fatigue issues, vitamin B, all these things that I was just like deficient in. And then I started training like stupid again, like 5 to 7 times a day, as well as all the infantry shit I was doing. And then they put me on these promotional courses, and eventually on them, they just put me back to back to back and made me like a commander of a team. And then they also made me, you know, in reconnaissance, which is like, you're doing pretty good and you're hold your shit together autonomously, you know, we'll put you there. And then, so they made me they gave me some, like a team capacity there with in reconnaissance, which is pretty much a lot close to the ground base work of SAS anyway, what their original plan was. So I did that. Whilst I was doing that, and I was instructing on a recon course to some new guys. I'd been in this battalion less than a year, still hungry for my goal and where I wanted to go, what I wanted to be. Never lost sight of it. Even I wouldn't talk about it all fucking day. I just don't think I would ever really talk about it, right? But you know, and then it was like I met this guy he was a dear friend of mine, Peter Kemp. He was in the unit with me, and I met him, and he was like, "Why the fuck are you waiting for another year or whatever? Just do it this year. You're already fit enough. Just fuck it, go for it." Talk to him, and you know, I was going to wait until the next year, but I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I will actually do it this year. I turned up, and 8 weeks before it, I got injured. Best thing that ever happened to me. I injured my lower back deadlifting, doing like CrossFit style sessions where you do like 100 deadlifts, and best thing ever happened to me because it forced me to rest. I'd never rested before, ever taken time to rest. I didn't know what napping was. I didn't know what resting was. I just knew that I'd black out at night and wake up in the morning from fatigue. And because I couldn't train upper body or lower, it forced me to actually rest for the first time. And then I turned up to selection at 21.
Wow. Now, there's a couple of questions there. One is, that's a heck of a lot of pain to go through, and something must have been driving you. Looking back now, being older and more mature, and looking back at your 20-year-old self, what do you think was the driving force to get you through, you know, bloody boots and putting methylated spirits on your wounds and injuring yourself and training 7 times a day? What was driving you?
So if I was to look back at it, right, what kid who's 17 and 10 days joins the military? Like, I don't know if it was as much as running from something, part that, but it's also like, you know, things at home, I guess, weren't perfect and wasn't, you know, didn't really make sense of that. And I firmly believe that any of the guys in special operations, the operators, right, and even a lot of the infantry guys, go in there. I say special operations because if you're in infantry long enough, you're really going to work your ass off to like, if you're super passionate, you want to be the fucking best you can be at this in that game and sphere, you will strive to be in one of those, you know, special operations unit. And the reason you do that is because I feel firmly you were not safe as a child. And I feel like that 100% has always pretty much pointed true. It wasn't until a long time later, after a very heavy, hard fucking road of working all this stuff out, that I realized that, so emotionally as a child, very void environment, sort of bullying. And as a result, I'd learned to kill all my emotions. It made me really good in the military to get in. Made me really numb as well, because the body and the mind, soul, emotions, everything's connected. Made me really good at being emotionally numb too. It took me a bit. It made me softer initially. Like, it wasn't hard to break me because I was constantly being prodded. So I was a weak shell. But eventually that shell just fucking hardened. Now, why does anyone join the military and why do they punch up to go to this? Why do they join at 17 and 10 days? To get away from something, majority, and to make themselves harder. Why do they pursue that role? To make themselves unbreakable. Like, to be able to defend themselves like a, you know, like, the word, I won't use that word, I know your audience, but like to make themselves unbreakable so that no one can ever hurt them. So I have a strong belief that all these guys that get in there actually come from either, you know, really hard childhoods in some capacity, and probably almost definitely some kind of a level of tier of an abuse or 3 or 2 or 3, like physical, sexual, emotional, something like that. Like, why would you put yourself through hell? Because at the end of selection, we went through like proper hell. Like, it like, there's not a single person who finished ours that was like, oh, that wasn't so hard or whatever. It was a fucking nightmare, and deliberately so.
I want to ask about that. Sorry for interrupting, but you made me think of what I was saying to I was saying this to Jess, my fiance, yesterday. I said, you know, for somebody to want to fight in MMA, it has to be a dark energy. Like, usually what drives something like that isn't like this, it's a dark energy. It's not like other sports, like swimming or tennis or whatever. It's literally, for me anyway, looking back, it was, I had an extreme fear, and I still have it deep inside, of being vulnerable. I don't want to be physically vulnerable. I don't want to feel physically unsafe. I don't want to be financially vulnerable, right? I want to be in a position where I can feel safe and take care. I think it's a very similar thing, and that's what drives me. There's like a dark energy there. There's obviously some light stuff and things that I want to have a good impact on the world, but what drove that initial thing was, I just don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to feel that way again. And I think a lot of fighters and a lot of people who end up in special forces feel a very, very similar way.
Dude, like, I see that clear as day now. You point that out, because, you know, like, fuck, man, you can't tell me that a lot of those fighters are obviously thugs from a fucking rough childhood.
Yeah.
The guys at the top are like savages, man. Like, shit that you hear about their stories growing up and stuff. Like, they're all like, yeah, from rags to riches. You're like, of course he was from rags to riches. Because whoever endured whatever the fuck he endured had to be in rags for whatever childhood story he just told, to talk about how far he'd come, right?
Yeah.
And then it just gets to a point where I feel like there's a breaking point for a lot of them, because you could be like David Goggins, where you just hate yourself to success. I like David Goggins, right, for his outside inspiration, but there's not a single, if you read his books, there's not a single part of me doesn't think that he's still trying to prove something to his daddy or the daddy inside of himself. It's like, why would you just fucking hate yourself that much? You know, and I respect him, and I think he's fucking amazing and going, and he's on his own journey. Cool, man. But it's like, never, ever, it's never enough. You never be good enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of the problems of security stem from that, like a fear of never being fucking good enough, never being strong enough, never being, wealthy enough. All these people that just, chase the infinite amount of money, infinite amount of physical safety, infinite amount of ego or whatever they need. Yeah, man.
I know you've been reading the Bible. You finished the Old Testament, but the book of Ecclesiastes, which is one of the wisdom books of the Bible, where King Solomon has everything he could possibly want in the world. All the women, all the riches, all the foods, all the accomplishment. He's the smartest man on earth, etc., etc. And he describes it like vapor. You have it for a moment and it disappears. It's like smoke that you see but you can't grab. And I think like none of those achievements, none of those championships, none of the monetary wealth will replace just feeling that peace within yourself. And I think a lot of people are chasing that, and you don't have to chase it externally. You need to dig deep to find that. But
yeah, it's actually a journey, and there's some, value in the journey is the destination, right?
Yeah.
Because what I've learned from Ben working with men in the last just 12 months, right? More intimately, like on a journey of development with them. So men don't really need the purpose as much as they know they're on the path to a purpose. They just want to wake up every day and know they're on the path to whatever objective. It doesn't need to be clear, that objective, but they want that sense of feeling that they're on that, right? Like, and men get way more joy out of that. And in fact, if they do hit this goal that they put on a pedestal and they've hated themselves and pretty much pissed life away to get there, they will feel very, very fucking empty. When they get there, they will feel disorientated and they won't even know where to look for the next goal. They probably won't even celebrate.
You hear that a lot of Olympic athletes winning gold and then being depressed because the chase is over, right? You've done it now. Now what? But take me back to selection. So a couple of years ago, there's a YouTube series where they go over SAS selection here in Australia, like the proper SAS. And now there's a TV show that with some dude, I don't know who he is, some former SAS guys that take civilians and make them do all these exercises and whatever. And I don't think he captures even a fraction of what it was truly like. But I know selection is physically daunting. I think most people can grasp that. But tell me about how it was mentally and emotionally, because you said something to me. I remember we were walking through Macedonia. I said, what does it take to be SAS? Like I get the physical part. I understand that. But what is the difference between guys who make it and guys who don't? And you said, I don't know if you remember this, but you said the guys that were the most physically gifted often didn't make it. They kind of gave up. They broke.
They definitely quit within 5 days.
And you said, this is, I'll never forget these words. You said you have to be a psychopath who can distinguish between good and evil.
Sociopath. Knows the difference between right and wrong.
That's right.
Like capable of doing what is necessary, but knows the difference between right and wrong.
So tell me about selection. What do you remember about it? How would you describe it to somebody just that has no idea what it is or what it entails?
It's really hard because as you go through these tiers, like going through the Navy as a 17-year-old, like we're doing sea survival, people almost died of hypothermia. We had one girl who had to go through 3, maybe 4 times sea survival phase because she almost died of hypothermia several times. In the end, they were like, she doesn't pass this one. We just can't put her out there because of her own. Eventually, she dies on one of these exercises. It was not easy. It was extremely challenging. And then as you go through studying, that was one of the hardest things, and turning up every day and going through the regimental bullshit to study engineering. And that was its own battle, right? Psychologically, to be there and to put up with stuff and do that and train every day at the gym and study as well, and doing that for like a year, and then going to the ship and doing this and then fighting the people on the ship that were not physically, but were kind of like resisting what I was doing. So there is a long journey of resilience. And if you're a civilian, like you're really going from 0 to 100 isn't going to make any sense. You're going to have any idea of what 100 actually looks like. Your 100 is like going and doing a marathon. And I was saying, I've got a guy that's today that I've through one of these training one-to-ones I'm doing that's running an untrained fucking marathon. And that's probably the closest I can get to simulating, only you're doing like 100 of them. Plus you're getting taught shit. between the marathons that you're expected to regurgitate at the end of maybe 3 more days later of marathons, and also getting leadership like task where you're now in charge of this rabble of dudes who just haven't eaten in 5 days. So you get on there, you go through this nightmare initial testing and whatnot in 5 days, and I think maybe a week. Then you're doing navigation day and night on your own, which is testing your ability to operate solo at day and night alone without anyone else, and checking in on the radio and all this shit, and mapcraft, fieldcraft, where you're able to use a map and see the ground and use a compass, all this shit. That's not easy at all. It's a whole other world. But you're physically fucked when you get there, and you're probably carrying some injuries at this point. And then you're doing a whole bunch of these other things, and then you're going through team days, activities. And by the way, when I say days, you're not like, all right, knock off for the day, 8 hours, 10 hours. No, you might sleep. You're doing something other than sleeping for 30 minutes or an hour a night. You're constantly doing shit. There's no husbandry. Like, to put in perspective how powerful time is, I did not brush my teeth for 23, actually it turned out about 27, 28 days, because I wanted that extra 30 seconds to sleep. It's how powerful sleep had become. I'm not kidding when I say 30 minutes. And then you get woken up in the middle of the night, and then you're taken out in the middle of the fucking cold, and 2.5 hour sessions doing like knuckle push-ups on gravel. So you're pushing up, collapsing until it's your turn to sprint. Then you sprint. I'm trying not to black out as I sprint. Doing that for 2.5 hours, just going, well, I hope I don't black out because my brain is about to fucking go. And just doing that and shit like that constantly. And then in between, it might be like, right, this is the problem you've got to solve. Everyone else in your team is doing push-ups until you solve the problem, and dudes are just collapsing on their face and fucking going, and you're trying to solve a problem and then leading team members through it. And most of these problems involve you carrying more weight than your body. So you're fucked, it just keeps going. And anyway, it's been engineered for like 70 years or something. So to be the same kind of way. So it's pretty damn good. So then you get up to, then they're kind of just following everyone and putting everyone through hell, unless you fuck up enough or you're inside, like, or obvious or whatever, or just lagging behind or not passing threshold. They kind of just, they're watching you for those people making those errors, but they're not really seeing if you're performing great. They might be like, that dude's really fucking crushing it. He's great. Make a note on that. But really, it's not until the last, you get like 11 days from the end, a 23-day selection, right? And
how long is the selection? Is it a month?
23 days.
23 days. Okay. Yeah.
23 days. All right. So then on the last, so 11 days out to 6 days out, they do this thing called Happy Wanderer, where you are left alone with all your injuries and your own mind and a limited amount of food, supplies, and water. And each day you are to just trudge with all your gear, with like 50 kilograms and fucking steel bar, and trudge on your own, left alone with your own thoughts to break you.
Where do they put you?
We would sometimes they do it in like sand dunes. Sometimes they do it. For us, they did it in these Stirling Ranges in WA. So that we'd also walk like 30K over the day, and then we'd also climb a mountain that's over 1,000 meters from ground level.
Wow.
And we do that with all the pack and everything. We've got these Europeans next to us that have come out to see the Stirling Ranges using their sticks and shit. And we're climbing up with a radio, with water, with clothing, with equipment, with food, fucking everything, right? And I remember I had so many injuries. It was like 7 main ones that I was counting, like including a new hernia developing and hamstring done. And I couldn't afford to stop for lunch. So I just kept hobbling, and everything was a hobble for me. Like I hobbled for 5 days over the distance, like just, blood and torn up feet and fucking legs injured and maybe new hernia. Pressing in where the hernia was so it couldn't develop. I don't know, man. I just kept going. And then you get to the end of that. They're like, cool. Well, if you did enough distance and whatnot, you didn't slack off, and I'm talking the SAS standards, then they would remove the ones who didn't perform enough. And then they'd get to the last 6 days, which is really where they have one senior member of the unit per guy, and they walk around and harass you and write notes on you in like red pens and shit, and watch you from like, a meter, 10 meters away, just stare at you blatantly. for at least 13 hours a day while they work you to death, carrying more than your body weight and solving team problems. Like it's arduous, designed to break you. And that's when they start truly assessing you at an individual level for the last 6 days. And 6 days out, we got half a cup of rice, which was a tease. And then no sleep. And then the next 5 days was zero food and no sleep, except for 2 days before the end. They brought out a green cold stew that was all brains and off meat that had maggots riddled through it. And you're expected to eat some of that. But you'd lost about 15 kilograms at this point, and you hadn't eaten in 4 days. So you just do your best to eat as many maggots or brains or whatever the fuck you could. But you weren't, and you weren't sleeping. You're not allowed to sleep. Like, it's not just you get 30 minutes. There is no sleep. You're not allowed to put your head down. So, and they'll fuck with you. They'll have you in villages building chicken coops for chickens that aren't coming while the chief harasses you, while the daughter's like trying to create some sort of drama, and you're digging a swimming pool. And then this guy's like, witch doctor's like, actually, I don't want you to that swimming pool there. Like 3 hours later, he's like, I want the swimming pool over there. He's like, fill that in and build it here. And it's like, whole thing is just a mind fuck of leadership and stresses and every kind of variety and problem solving, right? Like the guys that I was with had to be extremely fucking intelligent, learning shit quick and adapting under the stress. So then you get to the end. And then if you get to the end, you may get selected if they think you performed well enough. So just finishing doesn't mean you get selected.
Wow. And do you ever get to find out why they selected you? Or why they didn't? Do they ever tell you?
They have notes. One thing I was really good at was because, God bless, like in the house growing up, there was no real positive feedback. There wasn't really emotion in the house, and nothing, like my mum was great, but there was no real emotion. It was very stoic. Actually, not stoic's not that bad. It's like more just like no emotion, right? So I'd become my own self-soother and given myself my own feedback. Like if I thought something was valuable in school and I wanted to do it, I'd do it. If I didn't, I didn't. If I could think there was no value, I learned to think for myself and learned to evaluate my own position of like, I'm like, well, I didn't pass the schoolwork, but if I wanted to, I could have, but I just chose to not do that with my time and do some other shit that I thought was better for my self-development and interests. And it wasn't because I was able to be like, and then other times I'd be like, I need to do this just to know that I'm capable of doing this. And I'd do it and I'd be like, cool. And then some of the next tests would be like, cool, I know I'm smart enough to pass that. I'm not special needs. So now I can do other shit that I think is more worth my time to invest in. Same thing here. I was able to give myself an assessment of how I was performing. But it wasn't really a competition against anyone else, a little bit, but really it was just a competition against yourself, like how you showed up, how you led, how you performed. All these things were being noted. Like, were you selfish? Were you capable of leading? Did you snap at anyone? All these traits that are just non-compliant. Did I carry my fair share? Did I put in across the whole day, all days, every day? How did I answer this complex problem, this maths equation that they gave me while I'm carrying my body weight for 30 minutes or whatever? It's like just all this shit, man. That they would assess across like a pretty large range of criteria for guys, but I was able to assess myself. I'm like, oh, I definitely did this good. I did this not so good, but that's okay. I think they could, like, it wasn't a failure. It just wasn't great. So I think I made up for it here. And, I was able to really assess my own standing.
Wow.
And kind of knew I'd been selected when I finished. I'm like, it was like at the end of a test, you put the pen down. You're like, I did pretty good at that test, even though I'm fucking busted, but I did pretty damn good.
Wow. Couldn't even imagine, man. I mean, I have so many questions, but I think you summed it up pretty well. It's like running 10 marathons and then in between that, not sleeping, not eating, and having to solve complex problems and being under emotionally stressful environment. Like they're trying to physically and emotionally break you to see if you lose control.
Yeah. No, I mean, not eating, not sleeping, losing like that 15 kilograms.
Yeah.
Just being assessed constantly and judged and being required to perform at every given second. for like 24 hours a day for basically 6 days up until the end. The one thing that was interesting was like at the end of ours, they wanted to see how hard they can make it, the head instructor. Been a bit of a dick measuring competition for them to make it harder and harder every year to get better quality guys. And it worked. The only problem was it couldn't get officers through. There'd been a lot of officers. It's a traditional thing that people in charge do, especially if you're spending a lot of time in an officer. They would be like, do as they say, not as they do. So make sure you run, make sure you exercise and whatnot. But, for whatever reason, they're either A, lazy, or B, officers, were lazy, or they were busy in an office doing paperwork and shit. So yeah, choose your side, whatever. But like they would be doing a lot of do as they say, not as they do. As a result of that, when it came to them to have to perform, none of them could keep up and perform on our course. They couldn't lead better than the enlisted dudes. They couldn't operate better. They'd never been put into those conditions to lead or to be a follower or be a teammate or whatever, right? Like, and we were all in fellowship at that point on that journey, right? Support of each other, make each other better, and give you opportunity. Like, if there was a team leader, I'd be like, hey, and he was in charge of running a team in the serial, I'd be like, hey, I just want to be like, I think this might work, but I'll leave you to decide. And I pretty much just gave him the fucking answer. But I'm like, and I'm like being the good chief. And he's like, all right, cool. Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Right, let's do that. Nick, do you want to lead this element here? And then I'll lead this element over here. And then we'll bring together. Yeah. So it's like, you get guys that are really good at playing ball, but some of the officers and dudes would just snap. They'd be like, no, I'm in charge. We're not doing that because I'm in charge. I've got to show that I'm in charge. You're like, all right, man. There was a lot of, they couldn't get through. None of them get through on ours. It was pretty challenging. And then the leader, as I was saying, decided to make it even more challenging by combining the resistance to interrogation, 96 hours of no food and sleep straight after it. So instead of finishing for that, 23 days and, the last 5 days out food and sleep, they threw us straight into 96 hours, bag over the head, sitting on a rubber mat in a gown, shivering, with the same song on for 96 hours and blindfolded and occasionally being dragged away to be interrogated because you'd lost the ability to use your legs and walk anymore and hold your bowels and shit. It's like they learned a big lesson in this, the intelligence community, for using us for training, because they knew we're most resilient people at that moment. And I fucking knew it too. I'm like, there's no one else in this country that's more resilient than these men right here, right now, that are not quit for anything. But they tried to break us to see what information they could get from us, from someone who's that destroyed for 96 hours. It was another form of hell at the end of it, but it wasn't actually a part of selection. Also, we didn't know that. No one had told us we'd been selected or not. So as far as Wilkins is concerned, this is just an extended selection with another 96 hours on the end, which is now investigated for torture. So we're doing this. There was definitely like you see some Abu Dhabi shit or whatever the fuck it is. It's like, yeah, no worries, man. Yeah, it's like not that bad.
Wow, dude. So 96 hours, no food, no sleep. You're sitting, you're blindfolded. You've got a rag over your head. You're shitting yourself basically because you can't control your bowels. And there's the same song playing for the whole time. What song was it? Do you remember?
Oh, some White Stripes song. I don't know the name. I don't want to think about it. But if I hear it, I shiver. Like,
and then they take you away. They take you away every now and again and try and interrogate you to see if you'll break.
Yeah.
But at this point, you've already been selected, right? But you don't know that. And so now that's being investigated for torture because that's brutal.
Yeah, it was. Well, the 96 hours is standard. That's the standard. But usually you go in fresh, like a fresh person. You don't go in
not right after selection. Yeah.
Not right. Literally, the truck, we didn't even know we're finishing. We're getting on this truck from selection to get on the truck. And it's like, okay, it's like you've just done 23 days. This last day, you're like 23 days, which should be the end. But you don't trust anything at this point and you don't want to get your hopes up. But eventually you get on this truck and you're like, I'm pretty sure that's it, guys. Like, I think that's it. And then the truck slams on the brakes and there is, SWAT or whatever Australia has police there with dogs and tasers and barking and shit and bag you and then throw you straight into this 96 hours of its own form of hell. So it's like 9 days, 10 days without food and sleep.
Wow.
At that point, at the end of it, I was just hallucinating. I couldn't hold. I didn't have enough strength in my body to hold me upright because they make you sit on the mat, right, upright, like in a stress position, which is just cross-legged or on your knees or whatever, like the whole time. So people couldn't do that for like fucking an hour, let alone 96 of them. At the end of being malnourished and underslept, not underslept, no sleep and no food, other than the maggots, the brainy maggots.
Wow. Is there of all the different special forces communities around the world, is SAS selection known to be the toughest, or is SEALs just as tough, or what's the consensus inside of the special force community?
So there's two types of so you got the SEALs. They go through their own journey. They kind of get recruited into there, and then they realized they needed their own SAS group. So what they did was they created a selection in the SEALs, and if you get selected from that, you go into Dev Group or SEAL Team 6. So the SEAL Team 6 is the SAS version. So it's like its own selection in the SEALs to do that. And that's why they get the Bin Laden job. Okay. So, and their basically selection, as I understand, is based off the British SAS, where it's based off the British SAS, New Zealand's based off the British SAS. It's all based off this sort of more foolproof system that the British SAS used. And then Delta Force is something pretty similar as well that are emulated off that. And it's definitely, for those, if you want the sort of top tier characters, you're going to have to put them through that kind of hell, unfortunately. Yeah. Necessary.
So selection's over, you get selected. How do you feel when you know you've been selected?
Well, how I felt was I got broken out of the prison by the CO, commanding officer. And they just like, well, let's not miss an opportunity to turn this into a really good training serial. So they came in with live ammunition, explosives and shit and turned into the whole village into a combat range and set up targets and shit everywhere and used as an opportunity to do an entire breakout of a prison opportunity for us as the prisoners. So they proceeded to CO and a whole squadron came and broke us out, did a full training mission profile. And they got us out and they were like doing a whole like not performance, like literally doing it like it was fucking for real. They were learning the first time. They're like, holy shit, these guys can't walk. They were carrying us mostly and trying to shoot at the same time. Like they were realizing like, holy fuck, these guys are shitting themselves, pissing themselves with trying to walk. They can't walk. They're collapsing. So it was like an emulation for real, prison break or rescuing hostages overseas or somewhere. And they were like, they were shooting, like grabbing our heads, putting their gun in front of it, shooting targets and shit that were popping up midway, explosions going on. Fucking like the whole thing was emulated until we eventually broke right up out of the area. And then commanding officer of the unit was like, cut there. And he was just like, then he gave us this speech that you'd almost never forget. It was something out of like fucking almost like Braveheart, right? Like this guy had a scar on his face. Like he was no bullshit as a leader, respected as fuck and known for being a hard motherfucker. And he gave this speech that I'll remember the energy of it, but I'd have to ask a lot of guys for the words because I was borderline hallucinating up until like 20 minutes ago. I was hallucinating. I thought I got trapped under rubble and I was crushed and my organs were crushed and I was suffocating. But I was imagining the whole thing because I was just like hallucinating. I thought I'd been left behind and I was dying and I was about to be dead. So I was like my whole imagination was gone at this point. I didn't, not until I was like coming together as they picked me up and they made me, they started doing the breaking away from the village, shooting and all that shit and carrying us or walking us out. That was a pretty powerful moment to realize that you'd been selected. But that's also the moment where he reminded us that you're not in yet, which would be almost like the catch cry for the next 16 months of training.
You called it a daily renewable contract. You were like, every day was like you're in, but you're not.
You're never truly in. You're in, but you're never truly in.
Wow.
Yeah. but you never truly, which is a joke with this, but it's like at least the 16 months is true like that. You're not, until you have that beret, you're not in the unit. And that remains true. Like you could fuck up at any moment and it is consistent high stress. And you're like, you kind of need that, man, because you got dudes shooting over and past your head constantly in all conditions with all fucking night visions where you're looking through toilet rolls with green eyes and barely visible, and you're trying to make out targets and you're tired and there's just going on shit going everywhere. It's like pretty much always got something going on in many ways. And you want to make sure that dude who's making that call or whatever is just that perfect level of vigilance and discipline and whatever it takes to perform.
So that's over. You do 16 months of training. I won't even ask about the training because I can just imagine it being...
Go forever.
It will go forever. And then when's your first deployment and where?
I get out of the squadron, out of training. I go straight into a squadron and I find myself on Chogam doing anti-terrorism shit for the Queen. And
where is that?
It was in Perth.
Okay, yeah.
It was in Perth, Western Australia. So it was like, it's not really responsibility such that I think we would do, but we were there. So we're like, we're obvious choice for this. So just give it to us and we'll take care of it if it comes up. Did a whole bunch of training, that helicopters there, fucking everything for whatever we needed. We were just constantly training for it. Did that, which was busy but cool. And then as a first experience in squadron, then I got deployed to a few Asian countries on some quasi-diplomatic training stuff. And then I got back from that, and then they're like, Nick, we need a guy or a few guys to go to Afghanistan from like November to February or March or something. And they're like, you're one of the younger guys, you haven't been. The other guys have done like 7 rotations, 12 rotations, like the more senior guys, like, give them, they want a break. Plus, we fucking love it. So I'm like, hell yeah, send me, let's go. Like, I was stoked. I was like, this is fucking great. I was like a kid, like the most excited kid ever. Like, yeah, fuck yeah, send me on a combat operation straight away. This is great. I've only been here for like 4 months or something. 3 months. Wow. Fuck knows.
What year was this? Do you remember?
2011. And then the end of 2011 or in November or whatever, I went over and that was my first 4-month deployment. And we were doing 4 months because the tempo was so extreme. 4 months is kind of like the breaking point, whether like you're day and night, constantly doing operations back to back to kill high value targets or capture them. And they're all and their buddies, whoever the fuck's with them.
Were you scared?
No, I don't think I was. For a lot of it, like the first time I landed on the ground, I wouldn't say I was. I don't think scared is the word. I think I was fearful at some points, but I think scared is more of a boy energy. And I think fearful is more of a man energy where you're like, I'm aware of the danger and the peril that I am in right fucking now, but it is my duty to step into this fear with courage. It's like, that's how I see it.
What was a moment? Do you remember a moment where you felt fearful? Like, was it something in particular? Was it a particular mission, or do you remember what it was?
That first one. Yeah, I remember in the first few days, I remember like having the first like my first combat incident and killing a guy. And I remember being really aware in that moment, looking at his chewed up corpse from bullets, at the consequences of war. And I think that there was my first moment of fear, like existential fear, where you're just like, fuck, this is what war is. And then you shake it off and you carry on to look for the next dude and keep going. And that was
the first kill. Did you ever feel like that again? About killing somebody or killing an enemy?
No, I didn't feel it again. That was just the first one. It was like a reality check of consequences. Like, but the unit was really good at preparing you for that. Like, in many ways, like I was fucking hungry for it, but in the most controlled energy. Like, there's none of this Ali fucking McGregor energy screaming, like, no screaming, no battle crying or nothing. Like, I'm talking like fucking more like that samurai energy. From the guys in the unit, just really honed, humble, disciplined, but like controlled aggression and knowing, just so aware of the guys next to you and your disproportionate competence to your fellow man through sheer will and determination and discipline and desire and competence and integrity and all these things that just, when brought together, you just knew that you were, the most competent thing to walk that battlefield. And
that
you
reminds me
goddamn
of
gonna
that.
make it so.
That reminds me of a photo or a post that you put up a little while back. Do you mind if I read it?
Send it.
So this is the photo. I'll probably upload it post edit, but
oh yeah.
All right. And the post says, "Speak the truth. This is my favorite photo from Afghanistan journey. However, I wish to share my thoughts you cannot see in the photo, knowing full well that they may change your opinion of me. In this one of very few photos of me, I'm sitting outside a doorway, absolutely no cover other than the building itself. Tactically, I'm vulnerable, and I'm grossly aware of it. However, it's very deliberate. This is towards the end of my second deployment within 12 months. And this was not an administrative fault. I had strategically positioned myself within the unit to be continuously redeployed into combat consecutively. So you kept wanting to go back. He said, I didn't wish to return home, a theoretical home. We essentially conducted back-to-back kill and capture missions on these combat-oriented deployments. And amidst the daily repetitious ritual, relentless but composed, somewhat bloodthirsty even, the warrior savage spirit in me was not sufficiently satisfied. So I sat outside the door knowing that having extreme relative superiority, being disproportionately tactically competent to our enemy, that I would perhaps tempt any remaining combatant in the area to maneuver and to have a shot at me so that hopefully I, or at least another lucky operator, could finish them off. I look back and wonder at my mindset, how I got there. Essentially, I was driven by three things: warrior competence, validation in the eyes of my brothers and myself, keeping them alive, and hunting to the death as many Taliban as I could, even to go out of my way to encounter them should I successfully find another. Still to this day, there is nothing that will ever amount to the rush of riding a helicopter into chaos. I have no sense of shame in this as I reminisce. This was just one chapter of my journey, but perhaps it shows the mindset that warriors must forge in order to do violence on your behalf, and perhaps how challenging it may be for many to unforge themselves thereafter, if so they desire." Man, I don't even know where to start with that. with that.
Yeah.
But when you hear it, what are your thoughts?
Still rings true, man. Still rings
to do
true.
violence on your behalf. How do you feel about the people that you've done violence for now? Like, how do you feel about regular civilians? Because I think a lot of us don't know, and we also perhaps don't appreciate the effects it has on you guys after the fact.
We're doing a damn good fucking job if you have no relativity. We're doing a good job. That's a sign of the system working to protect everyone and do violence on their behalf if they are so distant from it. Yeah, I like now, like if I really look at it, a lot of it, like I feel like we're sent by your elected officials to do that violence on your behalf, right? And that's fine. And I think a lot of it, like, it still is very much like the old throwaway lines, right? That you're kind of really doing it at the time for the guy next to you. You know, you're sent there because you're doing it on the behalf of the elected democracy. However, when you're there, you're really, really just fucking like just trying to keep you the guy next to you, and to be honest, him first and you second alive. But also, not just throwing away your life, obviously, right? The reality is, it's like you can't help him. You can't watch his back if you're dead. You also become a liability on the battlefield if you're injured or fucking dead.
So essentially, you have this really strong bond with your fellow men, and when you're there, you're thinking about how to keep them alive and how to keep each other alive, and that's what's... You're not thinking about us. I mean, there's a sense of duty there, but you're thinking about your buddies, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about the fellow man, and dogs as well, by the way.
That's another one that I wanted to kind of go over. I wanted to talk about Coda, but yeah. Can I read that one, actually?
Fuck yeah, send it. Let's go.
So guys, again, this is the photo. So we've got Coda, and you said, there is no hunting like the hunting of man, and those who have hunted armed men long enough and liked it and never cared for anything else. That's deep. A warrior brother of mine wanted this quote written on the plaque of my discharge memento. He thought maybe it wasn't fit for social consumption on the wall of my house. Evidently, I disagree or don't care. One of those, maybe both. I'd like to acknowledge and honor my truly special companion, dog friend, and warrior brother, Coda. Coda gave the majority of his life as a special operations combat assault dog. He was not a lower or more disposable team member. He was a part of the pack. I learnt deeply from Coda. I first learnt of true companionship, side by side, no language, into the unknown. What unquestionable loyalty looks like. I have never heard of a single dog ever abandon a human, but countless abandonments of dogs and irreproachable trust. If Coda was first through the door, his primary responsibility, he never hesitated at the thought that you weren't coming in immediately after him to back him up, and neither did any of my warrior brethren, may I add. For a long time in my life, I killed all emotion within myself to dedicate myself to an organization and my warrior brethren. Coda was the first time as an adult that I opened my heart. From our time together, Coda's interests have always been at my heart. He was not a possession to be owned, but on his own journey and to be treated with love and respect. It was with pleasure that Coda transitioned his partnership and journey into the unit to a trusted warrior brother of mine who has truly cared for Coda as a loyal human friend. This trust extends into Coda's retirement after giving his life as service with his pack, fearlessly deploying several times, enduring heat covered in fur, faithlessly being roped off of buildings and out of helicopters, clearing buildings, ships, skydiving from helicopters and planes by day and night, and regular gunshots and explosions. Coda has deserved his retirement with his family and a dog friend. It's a highlight of mine when I return to Australia to see him and to send him Christmas presents yearly. I got to meet Coda last year. I think it was last year or the year before. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. So, dogs and men. And
dogs and men.
Dogs and men. And I've seen you guys, like you and some of your friends from the unit, and I feel like there's just certain things that you've gone through in a certain level of, it's just unquestionable. It's like if I'm running in this building, I know 1000% with certainty that the guy behind me is following in. Going back to like normal humans and regular civilians, have you found that loyalty or have you found that same connection with anyone outside of the unit?
It's hard to know.
Because you're not tested.
You're not tested. It's hard to know. And it's also hard to know as yourself as an individual until you're tested. Whether or not you do that. Now, I've got dear friends and people that I trust and I love, but it is very fucking hard to know. One thing, it was a very big challenge for me when I left the unit because I thought I'd got in at 21, and even the guys in the army were fucking great. I was working on great guys there, and the Navy were pretty good, as well as obviously the leadership should I mention, but still good guys for the majority. So when I was in the unit for that long and I got out, I thought that was fucking normal in many ways. Or I normalized it. It became a bit of a challenge. to adjust that not being the norm. And I had some hard lessons learned, which were good. I'm glad I learned them early.
Yeah.
Fucking had some of them learned. But yeah, it is quite challenging. And there's this guy that talks about that went and psychologically studied SEAL Team 6, so the US's SAS or SBS, one of the two. And he basically said that what they learned was that, like the All Blacks team, no one really wanted the star player as much as they wanted the guy they could trust with their life and trust with their wife. So loyalty, integrity. So what I've learned for business in the business world is like loyalty, integrity, and competence. Like it is really fucking near impossible to find in that. Let's say integrity, loyalty, and competence in that order of importance, and it is near fucking impossible to find all those three. And if you can, pretty damn good foundation.
Yeah.
It's very fucking hard to find that. And to be honest, there was another post I did where it's like, when I was from inside one of the shindigs, or, social gigs in Afghanistan in the unit now accommodation. And it was like, it's really hard to be in a bar or a social scene or whatever, to be around guys who are willing to die for you. That's probably, I will never be in that room again with those blessed men in that circumstances, in that time in my life. That was a moment.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to find that bar.
It will be.
And dogs. And fucking dogs, might add.
And dogs.
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions before we wrap it up. And perhaps next time we'll do another one of these and talk about some of the other deployments. But we got from the beginning to the first deployment.
Yeah.
2 questions. One is, do you miss it? And would you go back?
As I sit there and I talk about the social engagements with those men, my heart misses it. And my heart still thinks it can do the social engagements to some capacity, right? Connect with those men. But it's like, it wouldn't be the same without the other. Without the fact that tomorrow we could all be smoked in a helicopter and go down. Like, I've had RPGs fucking swirling past and machine gun fire fucking all the time, and always been shot out of the sky a bunch, or helicopters crashing for whatever reason. That's just the helicopter. So it's like, having that peril, combining it with not knowing if you're going to live tomorrow or tonight, get called out. It kind of creates that. Now, do I miss it? The day I left, or the day I decided to leave, I had this Vietnam veteran that had been this, psychologically, like, things were pretty fucking bad, and physically and physiologically, like, it was a proper clusterfuck. But he goes to me on a psychological perspective. He's like, Nick, I finally got myself to 99%. Like, I'd seen the damage it had done and how bad it was. And then I'm like, fuck, I don't know how long it's going to take me to come back. And I don't know if I can come back. And physically, I don't think I can do it. There's a whole bunch of reasons. And he looks at me, and he'd been working with guys. He was a head psychologist at a very promising, very, very, outstanding hospital. So he'd done it, and dealing with veterans in particular. And he'd been working with guys since Vietnam. So he had the track record. He's just like, Nick, there comes a day when you're just too wise to do it anymore. And I sat there and I looked at him, I nodded. And then within a moment after that, I was just like, that's it. It's my 100%. I'd done everything that I ever wanted to do in that unit and in combat and in whatever that is. And gratefully, in many ways, everything I didn't want to do, die. So take the good and the bad off the table. And, it was like, all right, it's time to bow out. And I don't miss it in that fashion of like the glory days. Like, oh, I wish I was back in high school with the football team or some shit, right? None of that. Just grateful and immense gratitude for the journey that I had with those guys and my brethren. And can't speak, highly of them enough, and remember those moments and think about it enough. And maybe there's a certain type of way that I I miss the camaraderie, but I've separated myself from missing the work.
Yeah. We're going to have some of those on. I think Blue and I might jump on sometime soon and talk about the journey as well.
He's got red hair, so be careful.
You mentioned earlier in the episode working with men. Tell us about that. What is that? And if someone was watching, like a young guy is watching this and he wants to adopt some of this mindset and learn some of these skills and disciplines and some mentoring, how would he get in touch with you?
Yeah, like I've got Instagram. You can just throw that in there, and that's kind of the way to do it. I just found myself, I kind of, not necessarily young guys, working with dudes of different ages that are just, and working with them across a whole bunch of processes, like 11-week journey where they're checking with me daily, and there's content, and it's more to fight that like apathy of life, the unknown of where I'm going, finding that authentic self, unapologetic, to tell the world to go fuck itself and be exactly who the fuck you are. That's kind of the path that I'm on. And I've got the other stuff going on in my life and the trajectory for different things. But this is just something that I do with maybe 3 guys at a time because it's sustainable. I can give them the proper attention. And it's super rewarding for me, but it's awesome to see these guys like to change and to go through this development. So yeah, they can hit me up. Yeah.
Love it. I'll drop the Instagram in the description, guys. I'll share it on my story. You can get in touch with Nico. Thank you for doing this. We'll do it again soon, and we'll talk some more. We'll tell some more stories for the people if they want it. Nico, as always, it's been a pleasure, my friend. Be well, be blessed. We'll talk soon.
God bless, brother. Take care.
Bye.